Within the silent halls of the great library, a young archivist named Elara took a forbidden step. She held a family heirloom called the Resonance Compass, a device attuned to echoes of the past, and felt its needle spin wildly toward a sealed and forbidden section. Her goal was audacious: to prove the existence of the mythical library of vanished worlds, a place most scholars believed was only a legend. By pursuing this forbidden knowledge, she risked her entire career and reputation, defying the direct orders of the head archivist himself. By the end of our journey, you will understand the true power of memory and what it means to be the last rememberer of a lost world. We will uncover why a civilization can vanish so completely, and what desperate measures one person will take to save history from being erased forever. Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? I always find it wonderful to feel our community spread across the globe. What would you risk to uncover a truth everyone else has forgotten? The rusted gate groaned softly as Elara worked her tools, a sound swallowed by the immense silence of the library's deepest level. She slipped through the narrow opening into the restricted stacks, the air thick with the scent of forgotten paper and slow decay. Her resonance compass vibrated in her hand, its needle pointing insistently down a narrow aisle choked with cobwebs. Every step was a gamble, a violation of the head archivist's most sacred rule. She did not see the faint, shimmering rune she passed over, a magical trigger that sent a silent pulse through the library's foundations. Her focus was on a single shelf, where a crystal tablet glowed with a soft, internal pulse, a rhythm like a sleeping heart. It was not recorded in any catalog, a ghost in the system. Then, a low grinding sound echoed from a nearby corridor. The stone sentinels, their monolithic forms stirring from centuries of slumber, began to move. Their eye sockets ignited with a cold, blue light, scanning the shadows for the source of the disturbance. Elara's own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the tablet's steady beat. The fear of discovery, of utter ruin, clawed at her, but her curiosity was a stronger force. In a decisive moment, she snatched the tablet from its resting place and tucked it into the inner pocket of her robe. The stone felt unnaturally warm against her chest. The sentinels were closing in, their heavy footfalls methodical and relentless. Elara retreated, holding her breath as she slipped back through the gate and into the familiar, well-lit halls of the main library. She tried to blend in, to look like just another archivist, finishing a late shift, but the tablet's warmth intensified, spreading through her like a fever. And then, a sound that was not a sound brushed against her mind, a ghostly whisper of a voice that had been silent for 1,000 years. It was not a word, but a feeling, a desperate, lonely plea to be remembered. The whisper faded, leaving only the tablet's warmth and a profound silence in Elara's secluded nook. Her hands trembled as she carefully wiped centuries of dust from the crystal surface with a soft cloth. Each stroke revealed intricate, swirling glyphs that seemed to swim beneath the smooth plane. As her fingertips brushed the center, the tablet responded. A field of stars erupted into the air above her desk, a three-dimensional map of a constellation she had never seen in any celestial record. Its central stars formed a perfect, spiraling helix, a cosmic signature utterly alien to modern astronomy. Yet the projection was sickly, pulsing with a weak, greenish light that flickered like a dying candle. This was not just a map, it was a set of coordinates, a final address for a world erased from memory. A single, staggering realization struck her. If this was genuine, every official history of the sector was a lie. The temptation to run to the head archivist, to present this earth-shattering proof, was a physical pull. But she knew the consequence. He would lock the tablet away, calling it a dangerous anomaly, and her career would be over for breaking the rules. The proof would vanish back into the vaults, and the truth would die with it. As the hologram sputtered, its light dimming by the second, Elara made her choice. She scrambled for a piece of archival parchment and a charcoal stylus, her training taking over. With swift, precise strokes, she began tracing the alien star patterns, committing every line and relative position to a permanent, non-magical record. It was a desperate act of preservation, a scribe becoming the sole copyist of a lost world's final message. The moment her stylus completed the final star in the helix, the tablet's light died. The crystal turned a dull, opaque gray, inert and cold in her hands. The only proof that remained was the drawing on her desk. As she looked up, her heart still racing from the effort, she saw Kale standing at the far end of the aisle between the shelves. He wasn't just passing by, he was watching her, his expression not one of curiosity, but of quiet recognition. The next morning, he intercepted her as she returned a cart of scrolls. Leaning in, his voice was barely a whisper, yet his words were explosive. "You are not the only one, Elara. The artifacts are waking up, and I know where to find the next one." Elara's fingers tightened around the rolled parchment as she cornered Kale between two towering shelves in the bustling scriptorium. The air hummed with the sound of scratching quills and murmured translations, a perfect cover for a dangerous conversation. "What did you see last night?" she demanded, her voice low but sharp. Kale did not flinch. Instead, he reached into his own robe and produced a small object, a flute carved from what looked like the bone of some great, ancient bird. He did not play it, but a low, resonant hum emanated from it, a vibration that made the air in their small space feel thick and heavy. "It feels the same as your crystal, doesn't it?" he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I have been listening for years." This shared secret hung between them, an undeniable truth that forged a fragile, tentative alliance. They agreed to combine their knowledge, with Kale offering access to a private collection of older, uncatalogued texts that he insisted might hold the key to her constellation map. Yet Elara's mind raced with doubt. Kale was brilliant, but he was also known for his ambition and a recklessness that had nearly gotten other archivists expelled. Could she trust him, or was he simply using her discovery as a stepping stone for his own glory? Her hand trembled slightly as she made her decision. Slowly, she unrolled the parchment on a nearby desk, revealing the meticulously drawn star chart with its spiraling helix at the center. It was a leap of faith, a silent admission that she could not unravel this mystery alone. Kale's eyes widened as he studied the map, his finger tracing the alien patterns. "This is not just a star chart, Elara," he whispered, his usual confidence replaced by a tone of grave realization. "This is a geographical coordinate. It points to a real place." Together, they cross-referenced the map, with the oldest, most fragmented texts in Kale's hidden collection. The answer, when they found it, sent a chill down Elara's spine. The constellation aligned with the legends of the sunken city of Lyra, a civilization said to have drowned itself in magic to avoid conquest. The texts warned that the city was not merely lost, but protected by ancient, dangerous wards designed to erase any who approached without the proper key. The stakes of their search had just multiplied. They were no longer simply hunting for knowledge. They were planning a journey to a place that wanted to remain forgotten. Under the thin guise of a routine field, cataloging trip to a coastal village, they began to gather supplies, their every move now shadowed by the immense and silent threat of the sunken city. A summons from head archivist Valerius arrived just as Elara was packing her field satchel. His office was a place of quiet authority, smelling of old leather and ozone, a stark contrast to the dusty chaos of the stacks. Valerius did not look up from his desk immediately, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Elara," he began, his tone deceptively calm, "your recent access logs show an unusual focus. A rather intense concentration of energy in the restricted stacks." He finally lifted his gaze, and it was like being pinned by twin weights. Meddling with unverified artifacts is not merely a breach of protocol. It is a path that has broken greater archivists than you. The dangers are not theoretical. They are a quiet, corrosive poison. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She forced her voice to remain level, weaving a lie with threads of truth. "My focus has been on historical meteorological patterns for the coastal catalog, sir. I was cross-referencing storm records from the older, sealed logs." The words felt like ash in her mouth. She had respected this man, seen him as the guardian of all knowledge. Now she was lying directly to his face, and the disappointment in his eyes was a physical blow. The internal conflict was a storm within her, guilt warred with a fierce, burning conviction. The Library of Vanished Worlds was real. The plea from the crystal tablet was real. To stop now would be the greater betrayal, a failure of her most sacred duty as an archivist to preserve truth, no matter how forbidden. His silence stretched, thick and heavy. "Very well," he said at last, his voice cool. "Your dedication is noted, to ensure your meteorological research proceeds without further distraction. Archivist Thuron will be assisting you, effective immediately." The pronouncement was a death knell for her freedom within the library. Thuron was a model of rigid orthodoxy, a watchdog. The net of suspicion was visibly tightening around her. This decided it. They had to leave, and they had to leave now. Discovery was the only path left that could possibly justify her deception and her crimes. That night, in a disused storage cellar deep beneath the scriptorium, Elara and Kale met by the light of a single, shielded glow lamp. "We leave before dawn," Elara whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "Thuron will be watching my every move by morning." Kale simply nodded, his own usual bravado subdued. He unrolled a worn map of the coastline, his finger tracing the route to the village that was their cover, and beyond it, to the treacherous waters where the legends said Lyra slept. They had to move quickly and silently, two shadows against the coming light, carrying the last echoes of a world that everyone else had chosen to forget. The rented boat was small, and unforgiving on the open water, each wave a sharp slap against the hull. Elara clutched the gunwale, her knuckles white, as Kale navigated by the strange star chart. The coordinates led them to a patch of sea that was deceptively calm, its surface a sheet of glass over the abyss. Peering over the side, Elara's breath caught. Far below, the ghostly outlines of towers and plazas sprawled across the seabed, a city frozen in its final moments. The water was so clear it felt like they were floating in midair above a forgotten dream. Without a word, they secured their gear and slipped over the side. The cold was a shock, squeezing the air from her lungs, but the true chill came from the sight of the ethereal guardians. They were not solid, but shimmering figures woven from water and memory, their forms encrusted with phosphorescent coral. They drifted through the drowned streets, and the ocean itself seemed to push back, creating subtle, confusing currents that tried to steer them away from the city's heart. Navigating the collapsing architecture was a nightmare of slow-motion terror. A balcony would crumble at their touch, sending silent plumes of silt into the water. Elara's claustrophobia wrapped around her like a second skin, every dark doorway a promise of being trapped forever in this liquid tomb. She focused on the steady stream of bubbles from her brother, a fragile connection to the world above. Kale pointed ahead, toward a vast central plaza, dominated by a towering monument. Its surface was carved with the same swirling glyphs as her tablet, and at its center was a star-shaped depression. It was a perfect match. Her mind raced. The tablet was cold and dead, a worthless piece of rock. Placing it there was an act of pure faith, a gamble on a design she did not understand. But it was their only key. She swam forward, ignoring the tightening in her chest, and pressed the inert crystal into the indentation. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep, resonant hum vibrated through the water, a sound felt more than heard. The glyphs on the monument flared with a brilliant, blue-white light. The water around the plaza began to churn violently, not flowing out, but being pulled down, swallowed by the monument itself. A massive air pocket formed, the water receding from a great chamber beneath the plaza with a thunderous roar, leaving them standing on slick, ancient stone, gasping in the sudden, damp air. Their victory was terrifyingly short-lived. As the last of the water drained away, the monument split open. From within, a colossal statue of a Lyran king unfolded itself, its body sheathed in stone and woven with veins of glowing crystal. It was not a ghostly guardian like the others. This was solid, powerful, and utterly awake. Its head turned and stone eyes, lit from within by a cold intelligence, fixed upon the two intruders. With a grinding of ancient mechanics, it raised a spear carved from a single, massive crystal, its tip pointing directly at them, and took its first earth-shaking step forward. The stone giant's spear descended in a deadly arc. Split up, Kale yelled, his voice echoing strangely in the cavernous, damp air. He scrambled to the side, bringing the bone flute to his lips. The sound that emerged was not a melody, but a physical wave of pressure, a disorienting hum that made the very stone of the statue vibrate. Cracks spiderwebbed across its crystalline armor, and its movements became jerky, uncertain. Seizing the distraction, Elara dove past its massive legs, her eyes scanning the newly revealed chamber. Her archivist's mind fought against the tide of pure terror, searching for patterns in the chaos, for any detail, that was not part of the monument itself. Then she saw it, a shallow alcove hidden behind a fallen column, containing a small chest of dark, polished wood, its surface carved with the same helix symbol from her star chart. A sharp, sickening crack echoed through the chamber. Kale's flute shattered in his hands, the resonant hum cutting off into a dying whine. The statue, freed from the sonic assault, regained its terrible focus. Its head swiveled, and its glowing eyes locked onto Elara, now cornered with the chest at her back. There was nowhere to run, the spear point, gleaming and sharp, leveled at her heart. Panic screamed at her to duck, to shield herself, to do anything, but fighting was impossible. Understanding was her only weapon. She closed her eyes for a split second, reaching for the ghostly whisper that had first brushed her mind in the library, a feeling of profound loneliness and a plea for remembrance. The words formed on her lips, not in the Lyran tongue, but in the intent behind them, a phrase of peace and acknowledgement she had deciphered from the fading glyphs. "We remember you." The crystal spear stopped an inch from her chest. The statue froze, its head tilting. The cold, intelligent light in its eyes softened, shifting from hostile intent to something resembling solemn recognition. It lowered its weapon and made a slow, deliberate gesture, one stony finger pointing first at Elara, then at the small chest. This was not a trap, it was a test. A test of violence had failed, but a test of memory had passed. A deep groan shuddered through the chamber as the monument began to tremble. With a thunderous roar, the ocean surged back in through hidden vents, a wall of cold, salt water slamming into them. "Grab it," Kale shouted, already swimming toward her. Elara snatched the chest, its surprising weight a solid promise in her arms, and they kicked desperately for the shimmering surface far above, the resurrected city, reclaiming its secrets behind them. The boat rocked gently, a stark contrast to the churning chaos they had just escaped. Elara's hands trembled not from the cold, but from the weight of the small, dark chest in her lap. Kale watched, his expression a mix of exhaustion and intense curiosity, as she carefully worked the intricate latch. It opened with a soft click, revealing not the gleam of gold or jewels, but a stack of thin, shimmering leaves made of a pale, untarnished metal. They were cool to the touch, and as Elara lifted the first one, glyphs etched into its surface caught the low sunlight, seeming to writhe and shift before settling into a legible pattern. This was the soul of Lyra. They spent the rest of the journey hunched over the leaves, their world shrinking to the boat and the words of a dead civilization. The story they pieced together was more terrifying than any tale of conquest or natural disaster. Lyra had not fallen to war or plague. It had succumbed to a slow, creeping sickness they called the Great Forgetting, a magical decay that unraveled memory itself. One by one, its people forgot their history, their language, their very names, until their society simply faded from existence, leaving only silent, empty cities for the sea to claim. Elara felt the weight of this truth settle deep in her bones. She was now the sole rememberer of an entire world, the only living soul who knew the full tragedy of Lyra's end. Kale, however, saw a different kind of potential. He traced a glyph describing a Lyran memory crystal, his voice low with ambition. "Think of the applications, Elara. The power to preserve knowledge perfectly, forever. we could become the most important archivists in history. His focus on the tool, not the tragedy, created a cold rift between them. As the library's spires appeared on the horizon, Elara made a quiet, decisive choice. She could not risk this knowledge being lost again, locked away, or misused. Using a fine-tipped ink pen and her most durable personal journal, she began the painstaking work of transcription. She did not copy the glyphs directly, but translated their essence into common script, describing the events, the culture, the slow horror of the forgetting. She was creating a backup, a second copy in a form no one would think to look for, ensuring that if the leaves were ever taken, the memory of Lyra would still exist. This act solidified her purpose. She was not a treasure hunter, she was a preserver. The final, chilling realization came as they docked. The text suggested the forgetting was not a unique event, but a contagious magical phenomenon, a blight that could jump from one civilization to the next, erasing them from history's ledger. Their own world, with its vast repositories of knowledge, could be the next target. They slipped back into the library's routine, the metallic leaves hidden securely within a false compartment in Elara's quarters. But the familiar halls now felt like a cage. Every glance from another archivist seemed laden with suspicion, and the imposing figure of head archivist Valerius, seen conversing quietly with Thuron, felt less like a mentor and more like a warden. The library was no longer a sanctuary of knowledge. It had become the very institution they might have to defy to save it from a fate worse than fire, a fate of absolute, irrevocable oblivion. Kale found her 2 nights later in a secluded carrel, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the Lyran leaves. "We are thinking too small," he whispered, his eyes alight with a feverish intensity. "The Lyran data is just one piece. I have heard whispers of a central archive, a core repository hidden deep within this very library that connects all the vanished worlds. It holds the master key, Elara. Imagine accessing it." He laid out a reckless plan involving a disgruntled guard on the night watch, a man known to look the other way for the right price. A few gold coins, and we could have unrestricted access to the lower vaults. Elara recoiled as if struck. "No, Kale, we are archivists, not thieves. Using stolen knowledge to fight oblivion is one thing, but bribing our way in, that makes us no better than the grave robbers who loot tombs. This is a line I will not cross." Their argument was a sharp, hushed thing, a clash of fundamental beliefs in the silent aisles. "You are letting sentiment blind you to necessity," Kale hissed, his resentment simmering. "The forgetting will not wait for your precious ethics. While you hesitate, entire worlds could be wiped from existence." But Elara stood firm, her moral compass a fixed point in the swirling chaos. Their alliance, forged in shared discovery, fractured that night. She watched him stalk away, a cold dread settling in her stomach. He was becoming a loose end, a spark near a powder keg of secrets. Alone, she doubled down on her own path. She spent the next 48 hours in a near-fugue state, surviving on brief naps and strong tea, using nothing but her legitimate archival privileges and the information on the metallic leaves. She cross-referenced the Lyran descriptions of the forgetting with records of other, lesser-known collapses, searching for a pattern, a weakness, anything that could serve as a defense. Her integrity was intact, but the weight of isolation was immense. She was one person, against a tide of impending nothingness, armed only with her wits and a stack of ancient metal. The explosion came on the third night. Archivist Thuron, the watchdog assigned to her, did not find Elara breaking any rules. He found Kale. Acting on his own, Kale had attempted his bribe. Thuron had been waiting. The subsequent investigation was swift and merciless. Elara was summoned to head Archivist Valerius's office for the second time. The air in the room was frigid. Kale stood before the large oak desk, his face pale and defiant. Valerius did not invite Elara to sit. He steepled his fingers, his gaze moving from one to the other, and the disappointment in his eyes had hardened into something far more dangerous. "Explain to me," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "why two of my most promising archivists are at the center of a conspiracy to corrupt this library's security and plumb its most forbidden depths." The word conspiracy hung in the air, and Elara knew their time for secrets had just run out. The silence in the head archivist's office was a physical weight. Under Valerius's unblinking gaze, Elara confessed everything, from the first forbidden step into the restricted stacks to the sunken city and the chest of metallic leaves. She did not plead for mercy, but for understanding, laying her transcribed journal open on his desk as proof. "This is not a myth," she insisted, her voice trembling with a passion that surprised even her. "The great forgetting is a historical contagion, and these leaves are our only vaccine." Valerius listened, his expression an unreadable mask of stone. He picked up one of the shimmering Lyran leaves, turning it over in his hands. "A fascinating artifact," he conceded, his tone cool and measured. "But your evidence is circumstantial, built on the whispers of a dead culture. My duty is to the integrity of this institution, not to chasing phantoms based on the reckless actions of two junior archivists." With a finality that crushed her spirit, he confiscated the metallic leaves and placed both her and Kale on immediate probation. They were confined to the library's main levels, their research privileges revoked, their every move to be monitored. "Your life's work here is suspended," he stated, his words a death sentence for her ambitions. The institutional walls, once a framework for her dreams, had become a prison. Kale's fury was a palpable heat as they left the office. He did not speak, but the look he gave her was pure accusation, blaming her stubborn ethics for their shared downfall. The internal conflict was a storm inside Elara. Had her principles truly cost them everything? Yet as the hours dragged on in the mundanity of her new, restricted duties, a quiet resolve hardened within her. She had made one crucial decision in Valerius's office. While he examined the leaves, she had seared their most critical passages into her memory, repeating the descriptions of the forgettings, symptoms, and patterns, until they were etched into her mind as permanently as the glyphs on the metal. Her work was not over. It had simply gone underground. She would continue, using the only tool left to her, her own mind. The stakes felt higher than ever. Valerius had initiated an official inquiry, but she saw the slow, grinding wheels of bureaucracy beginning to turn. Committees would be formed, reports would be written. It was a process designed for careful verification, not for a desperate race against a magical plague. She feared that by the time the library's vast machinery acknowledged the threat, it would already be upon them. That night, as Elara tried to sleep in her small room, a strange, silent fog began to seep through the library's open archways. It was not a natural mist. It was cold and heavy, deadening sound, and carrying a faint, sweet scent of decay. And in the silent exhibit halls, several artifacts recently catalogued from other, minor vanished worlds began to glow with a faint, ominous, and sickly green light. The fog carried a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Restless and haunted by the day's events, Elara watched from her window as the silent, unnatural mist coiled through the library's courtyards. Then she saw it, a faint green glow pulsing from the Hall of Minor Artifacts, a sickly light that mirrored the descriptions in the Lyran texts. Her heart seized. She did not hesitate, rushing to Kale's chamber and shaking him awake with a frantic urgency that brooked no argument. Together, they crept to a shadowed archway overlooking the hall. What they witnessed was not decay, but consumption. The fog curled around a delicate astrolabe from the lost city of Ethel, and as they watched, the green light within the artifact flickered and died, the metal turning a dull, lifeless gray. The fog was drinking the memory from the object itself, leaving behind an empty, inert shell. This was the great forgetting in action, a tangible, predatory force, actively devouring the last physical echoes of vanished cultures. They had to move, now, but they were on probation, their movements restricted, and the rhythmic footsteps of the night guards echoed through adjacent corridors. Every second of hesitation meant another artifact, another piece of a world, erased forever. Elara's hand closed around the resonance compass in her pocket. Its familiar hum was a frantic vibration against her palm, the needle spinning wildly, no longer pointing to a single artifact, but pulling downward toward the library's foundations. Using it now was a final, irrevocable act of defiance. It would expose her completely, ending any chance of salvaging her career. She met Kale's eyes in the dim light and saw the same terrifying realization. He gave a sharp, single nod. There was no other choice. She pulled the compass free, letting its pull guide them away from the main halls, down a narrow, disused staircase, sealed by a rusted gate that Kale forced open with a muffled crack. The air grew cold and thick with age. They were descending into a sub-basement that appeared on no map she had ever studied, a place deeper than the restricted stacks. The library was not just a repository of knowledge, it was the very source of the blight consuming it. The compass needle trembled, pointing straight ahead into the impenetrable darkness, toward a low, rhythmic humming that vibrated up through the stone beneath their feet. The humming solidified into a deep, resonant thrum as they stepped into the cavernous chamber. Before them, a massive crystal orb floated at the center of the room, its surface a web of fractures from which the sickly green fog poured like ethereal blood. Glowing lines of energy, like luminous roots, pulsed from the orb into the walls, connecting it to every artifact in the library above. This was the heart of the library, the source of all preservation, and it was catastrophically wounded. They were not witnessing an attack from the outside, but a death rattle from within. The malfunctioning heart was not fighting the forgetting. It was the very engine of it, leaking the contagion directly into the world's memory. Jagged arcs of raw energy snapped from the cracks in the orb, scorching the stone floor and filling the air with the smell of ozone and burnt magic. The entire chamber shuddered, a giant trembling on the verge of collapse. "We have to go," Kale shouted over the din, grabbing her arm. "This is a structural failure, Elara. We can't stop this. It will bury us." His face was a mask of pure survival instinct. But Elara saw the terrifying truth. If this core failed completely, the release of energy would not just bring down the chamber, it would unleash a wave of absolute oblivion that would sweep across the world, leaving nothing but a blank slate where history once stood. Every story, every song, every name would be gone. Fixing it seemed impossible, a task for master architects, not a junior archivist. Yet her mind, trained to find patterns in chaos, locked onto the fractures in the crystal. Their pattern was not random. It mirrored the harmonic fractures described in the Lyran texts, a specific resonant frequency that could shatter their memory crystals. The same principle applied here, but in reverse. Stabilization required a counter-harmonic, a precise realignment. "I have to try," she said, her voice quiet but absolute, shaking off his grip. She approached the shuddering orb, the heat from the energy arcs washing over her. Her knowledge was her only tool, a desperate theory scrawled in a dead language. Her hands, slick with sweat, hovered just inches from the cracked surface. Taking a final, steadying breath, she pressed her palms against the fractured crystal. A torrent of light and sound and feeling exploded inside her skull. She was no longer in the chamber. She was everywhere at once, drowning in the memories of a billion lost souls. She felt the last breath of the Lyrans as the sea took them, heard the final song of a forest people whose names were now dust, saw the sky fall on a city of glass and light. The collective agony and wonder of every vanished world flooded her senses, a tsunami of history threatening to shatter her own mind into a million forgotten pieces. A billion lives screamed into Elara's mind at once. She was a queen watching her city drown, a child looking up at a falling sky, a scientist weeping over a final, failed equation. The triumph of civilizations and the quiet despair of their last citizens became her own memories, a tapestry of existence so vast it threatened to unravel the very thread of who she was. The agony was a physical pressure, a weight of millennia crushing her from the inside. Yet within that chaos, a pattern began to emerge. She felt the original, pure purpose of the library's heart, not as a static vault, but as a living, breathing symphony of preservation. It was never meant to hoard these memories, but to honor them, to let their stories resonate in a delicate, eternal balance. Her own consciousness became the battleground, a single, fragile vessel trying to contain an ocean. Kale's hands were on her shoulders, pulling her back, his voice a distant, panicked shout against the roaring in her soul. "She is killing you. Let go." With a surge of will that felt like tearing her own mind in two, she shoved him away. To retreat now was to let every one of these lives be erased a second time. She stopped fighting the flood and instead began to guide it. Her empathy became her instrument, her archivist's mind the conductor. She did not suppress the memories, but sorted them, weaving the strands of joy and sorrow back into the crystal in an ordered, stable pattern, restoring the harmony that had been lost. The shuddering in the chamber began to slow. The violent arcs of energy retracted, and the sickly green fog pouring from the orb thinned, then ceased. The fractured crystal started to knit itself back together, its light shifting from that ominous, consuming green to a soft, steady, golden-white luminescence. In the hall above, the gray, dead astrolabe flickered, and its intricate engravings slowly glowed back to life. It was in this moment of profound, hard-won peace that the chamber doors burst open. Head Archivist Valerius stood framed in the entrance, his face a storm of fury and fear, a contingent of guards flanking him, but his wrath died before it could find words. His eyes moved from Elara, standing pale and trembling before the now gentle orb, to the restored heart, and then to the walls where the luminous roots pulsed with a healthy, vibrant light. The anger in his expression did not just fade, it shattered, replaced by a slow dawning, humbled awe. He was not looking at a vandal or a rogue archivist. He was witnessing a miracle he had believed impossible. The guards did not move. Valerius raised a single hand, his gaze fixed on the softly pulsing heart of the library. He crossed the chamber and stopped before Elara, his usual imposing presence diminished in the face of the impossible restoration she had just achieved. Her voice was raw, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes held a clarity that could not be ignored. She told him everything, from the first ghostly whisper of the crystal tablet to the Lyran texts, describing the great forgetting as a contagious decay, a disease of memory that the library's own failing core had begun to spread. This was not a collection of dead relics, she explained. The Library of Vanished Worlds was a living immune system for history itself, and they had just stopped it from fatally poisoning the very knowledge it was built to protect. Valerius listened, and the last vestiges of his institutional skepticism crumbled. He saw not the reckless junior archivist he had disciplined, but the one person who had understood the library's true, desperate purpose. With a slow, deliberate nod, he officially revoked their probation. Then he went further, his voice resonating with a new, solemn gravity. He created a new division on the spot, the Division of Vanished Worlds, and appointed Elara as its head. The responsibility was immense, a mantle of authority she had never wanted and now could not refuse. It meant leaving the quiet, predictable life of a researcher behind forever. For Kale, the moment was a complex storm of emotion. His ambition had always craved such recognition, but to receive it indirectly, through Elara's triumph and her steadfast principles, forced a painful but necessary reconciliation. He had to respect the method he had once called sentiment. Elara accepted the role, but immediately set her first condition. Kale would be her second in command. It was a strategic move that instantly mended their fractured alliance, proving her belief in his skills and his capacity for redemption. It transformed their partnership from a secret pact into an official, sanctioned team. The stakes of their mission had now exploded in scale. They were no longer two rogue archivists chasing ghosts. They were the frontline defense for the memory of the world, armed with the library's full resources, but also burdened with the terrifying knowledge of how fragile existence truly is. A single crack, a single forgotten story, could be the beginning of the end for everyone. Their first official act was to spread a new map across the planning table, its surface depicting the floating, mist-shrouded canopies of the cloud forests of Xylos. The airship ascended through banks of cold mist, its balloon straining against the unfamiliar currents. Elara stood at the helm, her hands steady on the controls as she guided the vessel using the Lyran atmospheric charts. The ancient technique felt like reading the sky's own breathing, a skill no one in their world had used for centuries. Their small, authorized team was a stark contrast to to their previous desperate flight, but the tension was just as sharp. Below them, the world fell away, and the floating islands of Xylos emerged from the clouds like a chain of emerald jewels adrift in an endless sea. Reaching the forest canopy was only the first challenge. The islands themselves were alive, their root systems tangling and untangling in a slow, constant dance. One misstep on a seemingly solid pathway could send a person plunging through a curtain of moss into the abyss. Their goal was the Xylosian memory vine, a legendary creeper said to store the history of its civilization in the bioluminescent patterns that shimmered across its leaves. But when they finally located a grove of the vines, the sight was devastating. The usual soft, golden glow was sickly and pale, flickering erratically. Whole sections of the vine were desiccated and gray, the knowledge within them fading into a silent, leafy death. The great forgetting was here, actively consuming another world. Navigating the treacherous, shifting terrain required every ounce of their focus. Kale led the way, testing the stability of the walkways woven from living wood, while the rest of the team kept a wary watch for the territorial sky predators that nested in the higher branches. The shriek of a distant razor wing sent a jolt of primal fear through them all, yet Elara's greatest conflict was internal. To harvest a living record felt like a violation. Was she any different from a logger cutting down an ancient tree simply because the rings held a story she needed? Her ethics, which had guided her so firmly in the library, felt tangled and uncertain here in this dying, breathing archive. She made her decision beside a particularly ancient and withering vine. "We take only what it can regrow," she declared, her voice firm. Using a precision laser cutter, she instructed the team to take small, careful clippings from the healthiest nodes, ensuring the main plant could heal and continue its life. But that alone was not enough. The fading light in the leaves was the true record, and it was vanishing before their eyes. She raised her resonance compass, its needle quivering as she held it close to the vine. Closing her eyes, she willed the device to do more than just locate echoes, but to absorb them. A low hum filled the air as the compass glowed, not with its own light, but with the captured, shimmering patterns of the vine's dying memories. It was a desperate act of preservation that respected the life of the source. They worked with a frantic, quiet urgency, for the decay here was far more advanced than anything they had witnessed in the library. Entire groves of vines had already gone dark and silent. Each clipping and each recorded memory felt like a race against an invisible, encroaching tide. The stakes were no longer academic. They were fighting to pull embers from a fire that was actively being smothered. As the last sample was secured in a stasis case, Kale pointed to a date, a slate, displaying their mapped route through the island. "Look at the pattern of the decay," he said, his voice low with a new kind of dread. "It isn't random. The withering vines create a distinct path." Elara studied the map, her blood running cold. The line of dead and dying forest, traced a direct, ley-like route across the floating archipelago, a clear vector pointing toward the next civilization on their list. The forgetting was not a passive sickness, it was moving with purpose. The map of decay, spread across their war room table, was a terrifying work of art. Each vanished or vanishing civilization, from Lyra to Xylos, was marked by a pin of cold, green light. Elara and her team worked for days, overlaying the data with ancient geomantic charts, and the pattern that emerged was undeniable. The sites of forgetting were not random casualties. They were nodes, interconnected by a web of invisible, magical conduits, known as ley lines, and the Great Library itself sat directly atop one of the most powerful nexuses. The forgetting was not a plague they could quarantine. It was a current being deliberately channeled, amplified by the world's own natural energy grid to maximize its destructive reach. The team fell into a grim silence, the implication settling over them like a shroud. This was not a natural disaster. It was an attack. A sentient, hostile intelligence was using the planet's veins to poison its memory. The race was no longer against time, but against a conscious enemy. Elara made the only decision she could, a move so audacious it made Kale pale. She proposed using the stabilized heart of the library, not as a shield, but as a weapon. They would send a single, focused pulse of pure memory back along the ley lines, a resonant echo designed to trace the malignant signal directly to its source. It was an immense risk. The heart was still fragile, and such an aggressive act could shatter its delicate harmony, triggering the very collapse they had just prevented. But to do nothing was to surrender the world to a slow, silent death. The chamber hummed with a rising, golden energy as Elara, her hands resting on the crystal orb, focused her will. She did not push the energy out, but instead offered it, a single, coherent story of a Lyran sunrise, a Xylosian song, a moment of pure, preserved joy. The pulse shot down the ley lines, a wave of light racing through the earth. The feedback was instantaneous and horrifying. The library's central scrying pool lit up, not with one source, but with dozens of flickering points across the globe where the forgetting was being actively manipulated and amplified. One location burned brighter and more malevolent than the others, a nexus of control in a politically volatile northern region, known for its closed borders and suspicion of outsiders. Intervening there would not just be an archaeological mission, it would be an international incident. Yet the primary signal, the origin point of the entire web, was unmistakable. It led not to a city or a fortress, but to a place considered a myth even among myths, the long-lost Starfall Observatory, hidden somewhere in the treacherous, ice-locked northern mountains. The northern wind screamed like a dying thing, a constant, razor-edged howl that tested the very limits of their Xylosian thermal suits. Each step was a battle, their gloved hands and boots finding precarious purchase on the sheer, black ice of the mountain. Elara led the ascent, the strange, living material of her gear pulsing with warmth as it bonded to the frozen cliff face, a stark contrast to the dead, ancient cold of the stone. They were not climbing toward a ruin, but to a structure that defied time. The Starfall Observatory was a spire of impossibly smooth, dark metal fused seamlessly into the mountain peak, its surface unmarred by frost or age. There was no visible door, only a seamless wall. As Kale scanned for mechanisms, a section of the wall simply dissolved without a sound, revealing a tall, slender figure silhouetted against the warm, golden light within. The reclusive order of astronomers had been expecting them. Inside, the air was still and silent, scented of ozone and old parchment. They were not met with hostility, but with a calm, weary authority. The leader, an elderly woman named Althea, with eyes that held the cold gleam of distant stars, explained their purpose with a chilling clarity. They were not vandals, but gardeners of history. Using the observatory's connection to the planetary ley lines, they had been carefully, deliberately pruning the memories they deemed too dangerous to preserve. "We do not create the forgetting," Althea stated, her voice soft yet unyielding. "We merely direct it. We have seen civilizations burn themselves to ash with rediscovered weapons, empires rise on the bones of forgotten plagues. Some knowledge is a poison, and its memory is a crime against the future." Elara felt the argument strike at the very core of her beliefs. Standing before this woman, who saw herself as the ultimate protector, she was forced to confront a terrifying question. Was she, in her desperate race to save everything, inadvertently preserving the seeds of the next apocalypse? The external standoff was a clash of philosophies, but the internal conflict was a war for her soul. Her team was tense, ready for a fight, but Elara made a choice that defined her new role. She lowered her resonance compass, a gesture of peace, and asked not to fight, but to negotiate. "What if we did not have to choose between preservation and protection?" she proposed. "The Great Library has the capacity to contain and study these dangerous memories, to learn from their context without unleashing them upon the world. We can build a quarantine for ideas, not a grave." The stakes in that moment were no longer about saving a single artifact, but about deciding the fundamental nature of history itself. Would it be a curated garden, weeded of its thorns, or a wild, untamed forest, where even the dangerous things had a right to be remembered? Althea studied her for a long, silent moment, the hum of the observatory's ancient machinery the only sound. A flicker of something akin to hope crossed her stern features. A temporary truce. Then she agreed, her gaze speculative. "Let us see if your library is as wise as you believe." She led them to the heart of the observatory, a vast, circular chamber open to the sky. At its center hung a colossal lens, carved from a single piece of crystal that seemed to contain a miniature galaxy. "This is how we focus the ley energy," Althea explained, gesturing to the intricate machinery surrounding it. "But it also allows us to see the currents of memory that flow between the stars." She adjusted a control, and the lens flared to life, its light projecting a map of the local galactic arm above them. "And this," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is what we have been trying to contain. A wave of absolute, non-terrestrial origin, a tide of forgetting on a scale I have never before witnessed. It is not from our world, and it is not sent by any civilization we have recorded. It is simply coming. That wave is not a weapon." Althea's voice was heavy with a terrifying acceptance. "It is a season, a natural, cyclical tide in the cosmos that sweeps through star systems, scrubbing them clean of accumulated memory. We are simply in its path." Her order had spent generations not as attackers, but as desperate farmers, sacrificing lesser crops to save the seed grain of civilization. They pruned the past to give the future a fighting chance. The revelation struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. The Library of Vanished Worlds was never just a repository. It was a bunker, a lifeboat constructed by the survivors of the last cycle, its heart designed to be a beacon against this specific darkness. But over the millennia, it had fallen into disrepair, its purpose forgotten, until its own malfunction began to mimic the very plague it was built to resist. The external threat was now a ticking clock. The tide's arrival measured in days, not years, but the internal schism within their team was immediate and profound. Kale, ever the pragmatist, saw the brutal logic in Althea's strategy. She might be right, he argued, his voice tight with stress. If we try to save everything, we could lose it all. Choosing what to keep is not evil, it is survival. Others on the team nodded, the weight of the choice crushing their idealism. How could they possibly decide which stories were essential and which were expendable? Who had that right? Elara looked from their strained faces to the cold, resigned certainty of the astronomers. A single, unwavering conviction solidified within her. We do not get to choose, she stated, her voice ringing with a new, absolute authority. A memory is not a ledger entry. It is a soul. To deliberately forget one world is to murder it a second time. The library's purpose was to save them all, and that is what we will do. She turned her gaze to the massive celestial lens. We will not hide. We will not choose. We will unite the heart of the library with the focusing power of this observatory and use every artifact we have gathered as anchors. We will weave a shield, a global tapestry of preserved memory, and we will make our entire world remember. The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. It was an all-or-nothing gamble that risked total annihilation instead of a managed, partial survival. The stakes were no less than the complete and utter identity of their world. Every song, every story, every name, preserved or lost forever in a single, defining moment. There was no more time for debate. They had to move. The team rushed from the observatory, the howling wind now feeling like the leading edge of the coming storm. Their race was no longer against a hidden enemy, but against the turning of the galaxy itself. They had to reach the great library and convince a skeptical, fragmented global community to entrust them with their most precious treasures, to believe in a desperate plan to save everything by risking everything. Their authority was a fragile shield, but they used it without hesitation. From the war room of the newly formed Division of Vanished Worlds, Elara and Kale dispatched a flood of urgent messages. They called it the Convergence, a desperate plea to every major library, museum, and private collector across the globe. They asked for the impossible, to send their most precious, irreplaceable treasures to the great library, to be used as fuel for a shield no one could see. The responses were a chaotic symphony of human emotion. Some institutions replied with cold, formal skepticism, dismissing the warning as the ravings of mystics. Others were paralyzed by fear, unwilling to risk their artifacts on a theory. But many, swayed by the raw, undeniable evidence of the dying Xylosian vines and the passion in Elara's voice, began to act. Heavily guarded caravans and shielded airships soon converged on the library, turning its quiet courtyards into a bustling, international hub of frantic activity. The external conflict was a nightmare of logistics and politics, a constant struggle to coordinate a global effort under a clock that only they could hear ticking. Internally, Elara was quietly crumbling. The weight of responsibility was a physical pressure. If the shield failed, she would not only have doomed the world, but she would have convinced its guardians to gather their greatest treasures into a single, catastrophic tomb. The trust of the entire cultural world rested on her shoulders, and she felt the terrifying fragility of that trust with every new artifact that arrived. She knew she had to shatter the last vestiges of doubt. With a courage that felt like walking to the gallows, she decided on a public demonstration. In the main hall, before a gathered assembly of hesitant curators, she presented a small, non-essential artifact, a simple ceramic pot from a minor, long-vanished culture. Using a captured wisp of the forgetting energy, she let the green mist touch it. The room watched in horrified silence as the pot's intricate painted scenes faded, its vibrant colors leaching away into a uniform, dull gray. It did not crack or crumble. It was simply emptied. The visceral shock of that silent erasure was more convincing than any words. The final holdouts agreed on the spot. As the flood of artifacts intensified, the heart of the library responded. Deep in its chamber, the great crystal orb began to glow with a fierce, steady light. Its power, swelling with every new story, added to its network. But a new sound accompanied this growing strength, a high, discordant static that buzzed at the edge of hearing for those sensitive to magic. It was the sound of the approaching tide, a cosmic white noise growing louder by the hour. Silence fell in the heart chamber, a thick and expectant hush. Around the glowing central orb, a circle of hands rested on ley-lined conduits, each person holding a single, irreplaceable artifact. Elara stood at the center, her palms pressed against the warm crystal, her eyes closed. She did not give a command, but instead offered a single, clear memory to the network, the feeling of a Xylosian lullaby. The response was instantaneous. 1,000 other memories answered, flowing into the heart not as a chaotic roar, but as a symphony, a warrior's oath from a desert kingdom, a recipe for spiced bread from a coastal village, the complex mathematical proof that defined a lost age of reason, the simple joy of a child's first steps. Light erupted from the orb, a brilliant, harmonious gold that shot upward through the library's core, solidifying into a vast, shimmering dome of energy that encased the entire complex. It was not a wall of force, but a shield of stories, a tapestry woven from the very soul of their world. Then the tide hit. It was not a sound, but the end of sound, a wave of absolute silence that crashed against the dome. The shimmering energy rippled violently, and a cold, profound emptiness pressed inward, a hunger that sought to devour every note of their shared song. The external pressure was immense, a physical weight on their minds, but the internal conflict was just as fierce. Each participant had to maintain an unbroken focus on their assigned memory, holding it fast against the psychic vacuum, trying to suck it into nothingness. A single lapse in concentration, a single forgotten detail, could create a weak spot in their collective defense. Elara's role was the most dangerous. She was the conductor, her consciousness, the nexus through which every memory flowed. She felt the strain of the desert warrior as he clung to his oath, the grief of a historian remembering a fallen city, the fierce hope of a mother holding the memory of her child's laugh. She had to balance them all, weaving their intensities together, strengthening one thread where another threatened to fray. She was no longer just Elara. She was everyone. The first crack appeared not in the dome itself, but in the mind of a young curator from the northern reaches. The memory he held, a complex star navigation chant, began to falter under the tide's relentless pressure. A corresponding fissure of sickly green light splintered the golden dome above them. Without a word, Kale shifted his own focus, pouring the resonant energy from his own artifact. A drum, that had once called armies to peace into the failing section. The crack sealed, but the effort left him visibly shaking. The tide was learning, probing their defenses, and the dome began to fracture in multiple places at once. It was a desperate, coordinated dance of reinforcement, a silent plea passing between them as they pooled their will, fighting to keep their world from fading to gray. A spiderweb of green light fractured the golden dome directly above the heart. Elara's voice cut through the psychic clamor, calm and absolute. Kale, sonic reinforcement on the eastern quadrant. Use the flute's original frequency. Althea, align your mirrors to the Lyran helix now. Head Archivist Valerius, the foundational seals. Channel everything. Their responses were instantaneous. A resonant hum from Kale's repaired flute wove through the air, a tangible thread of sound patching the tier. From the distant observatory, beams of focused starlight, guided by Althea's hands, lanced down to strengthen the weave. And Valerius, his voice echoing with the weight of 1,000 head archivists before him, spoke words of binding from a primeval tongue, causing glowing library seals to flare into existence across the shield's inner surface. The coordinated effort worked, the fissures sealing shut under the layered defense, but the victory was brutal. A sharp, crystalline pop echoed from the circle, then another. A carved jade amulet from a river delta culture turned to dust. A woven tapestry depicting a harvest festival simply unraveled into threads and then into nothing. These were the minor, less robust artifacts, and they sacrificed their entire stored memory, their entire reason for being, to provide the surge of energy needed to save the whole. Elara felt each loss like a physical blow, a tiny, silent death in the palm of her hand. She could not let her grief show, not when everyone was relying on her strength. The external conflict was a desperate, patchwork defense against an infinite force, but the internal conflict was a quiet war against her own heart. She had to make the choice she had always resisted. With a soul deep sorrow, she deliberately redirected the strain, allowing 3 more minor, non-essential memories to be consumed, their energy flowing to bolster the core foundational stories. The first words, the laws of justice, the songs of creation. It was a terrible, necessary calculus, the painful trade-off of preservation she had argued against, now made real by the relentless tide. The stakes were moment to moment, a breathless battle where a single faltering focus could unravel everything. The emotional toll was etched on every face in the circle, a shared exhaustion that went beyond the physical. Just as the shield seemed to hold, just as the pressure of the tide seemed to lessen by a fraction, a sound like a mountain breaking tore through the chamber. A massive, jagged crack targeted the very center of their defense, spearing directly toward the heart of the library itself. The central ley line, Conduit, flared from gold to a blinding, violent white. A high-pitched shriek tore from the metal as it began to glow, the seams cracking under a pressure it was never meant to hold. The entire shield flickered, its golden light stuttering like a dying star. To fail now was to erase every story they had just fought to save. Elara knew the cold, hard truth of the moment. The system needed a release valve, a conduit that could absorb the catastrophic surge. Her connection to the artifacts, forged through months of shared memory, made her the only possible vessel. It was a one-way path. She met Kale's horrified gaze for a single, fractured second, a silent farewell, and then she stepped into the raw stream of power. The energy did not feel like light or heat. It felt like being unmade. A billion lives, a trillion moments, tore through her not as a symphony, but as a single, simultaneous scream of existence. She was a city burning, an ocean drying, a star being born. Her own memories, her mother's voice, the feel of a book in her hands, the scent of library dust were tiny, fragile pebbles in this cosmic avalanche. The external agony was a fire in her veins, but the internal battle was a desperate scramble for purchase on the cliff of her own mind. She could not fight it. To resist was to be shattered. With a final, conscious act of will, she let go. She stopped being a dam and became a river, allowing the torrent to flow into her and then outward. Her own consciousness, the channel that purified the chaotic energy and fed it back into the shield. The golden dome above them flared with a renewed, impossible brilliance, its form solidifying into something more permanent than light, a testament to her sacrifice. The violent shaking in the chamber ceased. The deafening scream of the overload faded into a low, stable hum. As the last of the cosmic tide receded into the void, its hunger finally spent, the pressure vanished. Elara's legs gave way. She collapsed to the cool stone floor, her body spent, her mind a silent, hollowed-out shell. The only sound in the vast chamber was the strong, steady, and deeply resonant pulse of the heart of the library, beating more powerfully than it had in 1,000 years. The shield had held, the world remembered, but the cost lay motionless at its center. The sterile scent of healing herbs and clean linen was the first thing Elara registered. The world swam into focus slowly, revealing the worn, concerned faces of Kale, Valerius, and Althea, leaning over her infirmary bed. They told her she had slept for 3 days, that the shield had held without a single widespread memory lost. The great library was now universally recognized as the true guardian of history, its heart beating with a strength it had not known for millennia. Cheers and accolades poured in from every corner of the globe, hailing her as the savior of memory itself. But the cheers felt distant, muffled by the ghostly echo of a billion lives that had torn through her and the quiet, aching absence of the artifacts that had shattered to save them. She had become a hero, but she felt like a tombstone for the minor worlds that had paid the ultimate price. Her recovery was a slow negotiation between her body and a trauma that had scarred her soul. The weight of her new fame was its own kind of burden, a constant expectation that she wear her heroism lightly. Yet within that pressure, a new purpose began to crystallize. She had been a conduit, a living lesson in the dangers and necessities of their work. She decided to forge her legacy, not in more daring expeditions, but in education. She proposed the Memory Guardian Initiative, a rigorous training program to teach a new generation of archivists how to listen to the echoes of the past without being consumed by them, to handle volatile artifacts with empathy and precision. It was a choice to build a future where no one would have to stand alone against a cosmic tide. The stakes of their mission had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer emergency responders to a crisis, but eternal stewards of a fragile peace. The shield required constant, subtle maintenance. A global network of monitors now watched the ley lines, and the threat of another, future tide, was a permanent entry in their ledgers. Survival had been a frantic race, but stewardship was a quiet, unending marathon. Weeks later, as Elara walked through the restored tranquility of the main library, a familiar, gentle vibration stirred in her pocket. She paused, drawing out the resonance compass. Its needle, which had once spun so wildly, now trembled with a new, faint, and insistent pull, pointing toward a section of the archives that had always been mapped as empty. It was a whisper of a world so completely forgotten that not even the great library had ever known its name. The scent of polished stone and fresh ink filled the grand atrium as Elara stood before the newly unveiled wing of the great library. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the central display, where the shimmering Lyran leaves and a carefully preserved clipping of the Xylosian memory vine rested under protective glass. Archivists, diplomats, and citizens from across the globe filled the space, their quiet murmurs a testament to a world choosing to remember together. Elara's voice, though soft, carried to the farthest corners. "We do not build this division to glorify the past," she said, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "We build it to learn from it. Even the most painful history holds a lesson, and to forget that pain is to invite its return. This is not a tomb for dead things, but a school for the living." The applause was not thunderous, but thoughtful, a shared understanding settling over the atrium. In the weeks that followed, the division's halls transformed into a bustling, international hub. Applications poured in from scholars who had once dismissed the vanished worlds as myth, from engineers who wanted to help maintain the memory shield, and from archivists carrying precious fragments of their own local histories, eager to add their threads to the global tapestry. The external challenge was no longer survival, but management, a constant, delicate negotiation of competing research proposals, cultural sensitivities, and logistical nightmares. Elara found herself trapped in an endless cycle of meetings and budgets, her hands, which had once touched ancient crystal, now shuffling parchment. The internal conflict was a quiet ache, a longing for the silent thrill of a new discovery, for the feel of a resonant artifact humming in her palm. She missed the work, the direct connection to the echoes she had sworn to protect. One afternoon, staring at a towering stack of personnel files, she made a decision that solidified her growth from a lone researcher into a true leader. She called Kale and a select group of the division's most promising international members to her office. "I am creating a council," she told them, placing a charter on the table. "You will have equal authority in guiding our research and our ethics. This cannot be my division. It must belong to all of us." Delegating was a leap of faith, but it was the only way to ensure the mission would outlive her. Kale, now freed from the shadow of his past ambition, embraced his role as a coordinator with a surprising deftness, his pragmatism perfectly balancing the council's diverse ideals. The stakes of their work had evolved. The immediate threat was gone, but the long-term sustainability of the memory shield required constant, vigilant maintenance. Furthermore, their expanded network of researchers was now unearthing new caches of knowledge, some of which contained records of terrifying weapons or plagues, exactly the kind of dangerous artifacts the astronomers had sought to prune. The ethical dilemma was no longer theoretical. Did they preserve a blueprint for a soul-devouring engine, locking it away in a metaphysical vault, or did they destroy it and risk forgetting the very reason it was feared? During the opening ceremony, As the crowd milled around the exhibits, Elara's eyes had been drawn to a young apprentice, a girl no older than she had been when she first stole into the restricted stacks. The girl stood utterly still, her nose nearly pressed to the glass case containing the Lyran leaves, her expression one of pure, unvarnished wonder. It was a mirror of her own beginning, a reminder of the raw curiosity that had started it all. That single, silent moment anchored her. It was a reminder that for all the administrative burdens, the true heart of their work was not in the council chambers, but in that spark of awe in a young person's eyes, in the perpetual, quiet miracle of passing a story from one generation to the next, ensuring no world, no matter how small or painful, would ever be completely vanished again. A quiet knock on her office door pulled Elara from a report on ley line stability. Kale stood in the doorway, his posture no longer that of a conspirator, but of a fellow professional. He held a detailed portfolio, its pages filled with seismic readings, historical cross-references, and a meticulously outlined safety protocol. He proposed a joint expedition to a newly identified site, a cavern system where the memories of a lost culture were resonating at a dangerously unstable frequency. His plan was not a reckless gamble, but a measured, ethical response, prioritizing containment and study over extraction. Elara saw the profound change in his eyes. This was not the man who had once suggested bribing a guard. This was a senior archivist, offering a solution built on the very integrity he had once been willing to compromise. She agreed without hesitation. For Kale, the internal battle was fought in the weeks of preparation, in the way he double-checked every contingency and openly sought counsel from junior team members. He was not just planning a mission, he was actively dismantling his own past reputation, brick by careful brick. The external tension came from the division itself. Whispers lingered in the halls, doubts about the wisdom of pairing the division's head with its most famously reckless former member. They had to prove that their partnership was not a return to old habits, but the evolution of them. The moment of true resolution came during the final pre-expedition briefing. Elara stood before the assembled team and, with a calm and deliberate voice, named Kale as the mission lead. The decision was a shock to many, a profound gesture of faith that instantly silenced the lingering skepticism. It was not a reward for past deeds, but an investment in the archivist he had become. The stakes of this mission were different. Success would mean more than just securing another artifact. It would cement a legacy of trust and cooperation, proving that the division's future could be built on the solid foundation of redeemed pasts. As the final crates of equipment were being loaded, a sealed note was delivered to Elara by a junior courier. The parchment was of a familiar, heavy quality, bearing the personal seal of head archivist Valerius. His message was brief and direct. He was retiring, and his formal recommendation to the library's governing council named her, Elara, as his sole proposed successor. The master key felt surprisingly heavy in Elara's palm, its cool, aged brass etched with the wear of countless hands. Valerius' office was a landscape of half-filled crates, the scent of departing dust hanging in the air. "This is not just a key to doors," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "It is a key to trust. The weight of the entire library, of every story ever entrusted to its care, settled onto her shoulders." To accept meant stepping away from the thrill of discovery in forgotten ruins. trading the whisper of ancient artifacts for the quiet hum of administrative machinery. She would become the guardian of the guardians, and the thought threatened to smother the very passion that had brought her here. Could she truly lead from behind a desk? Yet, as her fingers closed around the key, she saw the bigger picture. From this position, she could shield the entire network, influence global policy, and ensure no one would ever have to fight for memory in the shadows again. Her decision was quiet but firm. "I accept," she said, "on two conditions. I will lead one expedition a year to keep my connection to the work alive, and the division of vanished worlds must retain its autonomy, its freedom to innovate without being bogged down by the library's older protocols." Valerius nodded, a slow, knowing smile gracing his features. "A wise balance," he replied. "Tradition needs its stewards, but progress needs its pioneers." With a final, grateful look, he walked past her and out of the office for the last time. The library is in good hands. As the door clicked shut, Elara turned, the key a solid promise in her grip, and saw them. The entire library staff, from the newest apprentices to the most senior curators, filled the grand hallway, their silent, hopeful faces looking to her. The future of knowledge itself waited for her first command. Her first decree, as head archivist, was a quiet revolution. Elara announced that the great library would no longer wait for history to be handed down by kings and conquerors. It would now actively seek out the stories that empires had ignored, the artifacts of cultures marginalized into near oblivion. The library's mission was redefined, with a new mandate to preserve the heritage of those who had been silenced, ensuring no civilization could be vanished a second time through simple neglect or institutional bias. The reaction was immediate and divided. A wave of excitement swept through younger archivists, who saw a more honest and complete historical record finally coming into view. But from the older, more traditionalist quarters, there was a rumble of discontent. They argued that the library's purpose was to safeguard ancient, written texts, not to become a repository for what they dismissively called folk tales and rustic crafts. The external conflict was a battle of philosophies waged in hushed tones in the scriptorium and over council tables. Lyra faced this resistance not with anger, but with an unshakable conviction. She held firm, reminding everyone that a history that only recorded the powerful was a history half told, a distorted reflection in a broken mirror. Her vision was inclusive and expansive, and she would not let tradition stand in the way of truth. To solidify this new path, she made a decisive character choice. She established the Living Memory Archive, a revolutionary project that used a blend of enchanted crystals and advanced recording devices. Its purpose was to capture the voices, songs, and stories of living elders, indigenous craft masters, and speakers of critically endangered languages. This was not an archive of dusty relics, but a vibrant, breathing record that honored the present as a vital part of the past. The stakes in this quiet conflict were profound. The relevance and moral authority of the Great Library itself hung in the balance. Could this ancient institution evolve to truly represent the full, messy, and magnificent tapestry of humanity's journey? Or would it remain a monument to a narrow and selective past? As the first recordings were successfully made, a gentle hum drew Elara's attention to the resonance compass on her desk. It was not trembling with its old, frantic urgency, but vibrating with a soft, deep, and contented pulse, as if the library itself was finally breathing a long-held sigh of relief. The blank spot on the memory map was a perfect circle of nothing. For weeks, Elara had watched the resonance compass on her desk, its needle trembling with a faint but unshakable pull toward a region officially listed as cartographically inert. There were no ruins there, no legends, not even a whisper of a folk tale. It was a hole in the world story, a place history had seemingly bypassed entirely. This was far more unsettling than a known vanished civilization, a world that could erase itself so completely that not even the great memory tide could find a trace of it, was a terrifying new paradigm. The external debate among her council was cautious and logical. They argued it could be a void, a place of such profound magical negation that sending a team would be like sending explorers into a black hole. It could also be a deliberate trap, a snare laid by a culture that valued its isolation enough to kill for it. Yet the internal pull for Lyra was irresistible. This was the ultimate archival mystery, a silence so deep it demanded to be heard. As head archivist, she knew the safest choice was to observe and study from a distance. But the archivist who had once defied the entire library to follow a whisper knew that some truths could only be found by stepping into the unknown. She decided to lead the expedition herself, viewing it as the final test of her new role, a balance between her duty to protect and her core belief that no story should be left untold. The stakes were the purest form of the unknown. They could find a new understanding of how a civilization dies, or they could awaken a force that believed its right to be forgotten was absolute. Under a canopy of sharp, cold stars, Elara met her small, hand-picked team at the library's main gate. She adjusted the pack on her shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of field gear and the new, solid presence of the master key in her pocket. It was not a key to safety, but to responsibility, and tonight, it was turning the lock on the last blank page in the book of the world. The mist in the valley was not cold, but still, a soft blanket of quiet that seemed to absorb the very idea of sound. Elara stood at its edge, the resonance compass a frantic, spinning disk in her palm, utterly unmoored. There were no ruins to map, no glyphs to decipher, no artifacts humming with a desperate plea to be remembered. The profound silence was not an absence, but a presence. It was the artifact itself. This civilization had not been erased. It had evolved, moving beyond the need for physical markers, leaving behind only the echo of their departure in the form of this perfect, peaceful stillness. The ultimate goal of any archivist was to preserve a record, but here, the record was the decision to leave no record at all. Her team waited behind her, their instruments useless, their confusion palpable. The pragmatic choice, the one her old self would have made, was to plant a memory marker, to inscribe this location into the library's maps, and claim this silent mystery for study. But as the deep, resonant quiet seeped into her, she understood that to do so would be the greatest act of vandalism. It would be like shouting in a sacred space, shattering a perfect piece of art simply because she could not comprehend its beauty. This was not a mystery to be solved, but a truth to be honored. Her journey had begun with a desperate need to prove a truth everyone had forgotten, to find answers at any cost. It had led her through drowned cities and dying forests, to the heart of the library and the edge of the cosmos. Now it ended here, with the realization that the most important knowledge is sometimes knowing what not to know. She slowly closed her hand around the compass, quieting its spin, and took a single step back. "We leave it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried absolute finality. Some stories are not meant to be kept on a shelf. They are meant to be felt, and then left for the wind. In that moment, she was no longer just the head archivist, a title of immense power and responsibility. She had become something more essential, a guardian not of answers, but of the beautiful, eternal questions that make the universe worth remembering. The halls of the great library felt different upon her return, the air itself seeming to breathe with a new, deeper rhythm. Elara's first official act, as head archivist, was to establish the Code of Silence, a sacred protocol protecting places like the Valley of Stillness. It was a decree that some knowledge is too profound to be catalogued, a recognition that the map of the world must always contain blank spaces to honor the right of a story to remain untold. Under her guidance, the Library of Vanished Worlds transformed. It was no longer a static mausoleum for dead cultures, but a vibrant, living entity that celebrated the unknown as fervently as it preserved the known. New wings were dedicated not to artifacts, but to questions, to the great unsolved mysteries that would inspire generations of seekers. She often walked the quiet aisles long after dusk, her fingers trailing along the spines of books that were no longer just paper and ink, but vessels of lived experience. The gentle, resonant hum of the heart was a constant companion, a lullaby woven from a billion remembered lives. In those solitary moments, surrounded by the whispers of all that had been saved, she felt a profound contentment. Her journey had not merely been about rescuing the past from oblivion. It was about forging a future with the wisdom to cherish both memory and the sacred mystery that gives it meaning. The door was now held open, waiting for the next curious soul, the next young archivist who would hear a faint whisper from the stacks and feel that same irresistible pull into the endless, wondrous exploration.